The final 24 hours of Robert Alton Harris, the execution that paralyzed a prison. Hi everyone. On the morning of April 20th, 1992, a cold breeze drifted through the barred window of a death row cell in San Quentin. Inside, Robert Alton Harris lay awake, his execution just hours away. California hadn't carried out the death penalty in 20 years, and the weight of that moment hung heavy over every corridor of the prison. But for Harris, once convicted of executing 2 teenage boys over a stolen car and half-eaten burgers, the countdown had already begun. As the state locked down and legal appeals swirled into the night, Harris remained eerily calm, eating fried chicken, quoting grim poetry, and walking twice into the gas chamber. In a chilling twist, the first attempt was stopped seconds before the gas was released. What followed was one of the most bizarre, haunting, and controversial executions in modern history. So what really happened inside San Quentin during Harris's final 24 hours? Let's take a closer look. Dear friends, the final 24 hours of Robert Alton Harris weren't just the end of one man's life. They were the dramatic culmination of legal warfare, public outcry, and an execution process that pushed the boundaries of what justice means in modern America. It began before dawn on April 20th, 1992. Harris lay awake in his cell at San Quentin State Prison, cold from the early morning breeze drifting through the narrow window. He tried closing his eyes, but the reality of the hours ahead wouldn't let his mind rest. The day marked not just his execution, but California's first in 25 years. And it would not be quiet. 14 years earlier, Harris had committed a crime that shocked the nation. In 1978, he abducted 2 teenage boys, John Majewski and Michael Baker, forcing them into a secluded area where he shot both in cold blood. What he did next was beyond chilling. He ate the boys' half-eaten hamburgers before taking their car to commit a bank robbery. The brutality, senselessness, and arrogance of the crime left little room for sympathy. By 5 a.m. on execution day, the prison stirred differently. San Quentin, home to over 5,500 inmates, went into full lockdown. No yard time, no movement, no work assignments. While Harris's final hours ticked down, the prison sealed itself in tense silence. Even among hardened guards, there was unease. Executions may be official business, but they are never routine. Guards entered Harris's cell for a final security sweep. The search was thorough and methodical, checking the toilet, tapping walls, inspecting his mattress, even X-raying his pillow. They were hunting for anything that could disrupt the execution process: contraband, notes, or even makeshift weapons. But they found nothing. Harris was ready, calm, and detached. Breakfast arrived: scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, but he barely touched it. At 9 a.m., visitation began. Despite the horror of his crimes, Harris wasn't entirely alone. His cousin, Leon Harris, was there. So was his little brother, Randall, and a few close friends, including his attorney Michael Lawrence, who was still scrambling to file last-minute appeals. The guards allowed minimal contact, but made an exception for a single hug. For a few hours, Harris was surrounded by the people who had managed to separate the man from the murderer. Leon, a Baptist minister from Alabama, was also Harris's spiritual advisor. He would remain with him until the very end. At 6 p.m., visitation ended. The prison moved into its final phase. Harris was strip-searched again and escorted 15 steps to a holding cell next to the gas chamber, a chilling proximity to his own death. There, the warden asked how he was doing. "Everything is fine," Harris answered. He even asked the warden how he was doing. One could almost forget what this day was meant to be. A few minutes later, Harris's final meal was delivered to the holding cell: a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, 2 large pizzas, a 6-pack of Pepsi, a bag of jelly beans, and 2 packs of Camel cigarettes. He shared the food with Leon, though neither ate much. Harris mostly paced back and forth on the small mattress that doubled as a bench. The waiting, it seemed, was finally getting to him. But just when everything was in place, prison sealed, witnesses assembled, gas chamber ready, the legal chaos exploded. Appeals were still being filed, and just before midnight, a phone rang in the holding cell. Harris's attorney delivered the news. "You gotta stay, but only for 4 hours." What followed was an unprecedented tug-of-war between federal courts, the state of California, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Judges debated whether execution by cyanide gas constituted cruel and unusual punishment. For hours. Harris sat slumped on the mattress, barely speaking, wrapped in a blanket. He looked like a man halfway between the living and the dead. At 6 a.m. the next morning, after a marathon of legal back and forth, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered its final word: no more delays. The execution would proceed. Harris was brought back to the gas chamber. This time, there would be no reprieve. The room was filled with 57 witnesses, including family members of both Harris and his victims, law enforcement, and journalists, behind thick glass. They watched as Harris entered, calm and composed, wearing clean prison blues. He was strapped to the metal chair marked A1 of 2 in the chamber, originally designed to accommodate double executions. The straps were tightened. Harris scanned the faces behind the glass, straining his neck in search of someone familiar. Then he mouthed 2 unexpected words. "I'm sorry." It was the first and only sign of remorse anyone had seen from him. At 6:05 a.m., the warden gave the signal. The lever was pulled. Cyanide pellets dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid beneath the chair, releasing a lethal cloud of hydrogen cyanide gas. Harris inhaled deeply, but nothing happened at first. Witnesses grew anxious. The gas seemed delayed. Finally, his body twitched. He gasped 4 or 5 times, his head snapping back, eyes rolling. 30 seconds passed. Then his head slumped forward. But suddenly, it jerked upright again, his body struggling against the straps, muscles tensing as the gas took hold. And then stillness. At 6:21 a.m., Warden Daniel Vasquez declared inmate B. Robert Alton Harris dead. An autopsy followed, as required by law. His brain was removed and studied, but no abnormalities were found. 3 days later, Harris's remains were cremated and returned to his family. Unlike many infamous criminals, there would be no gravestone, no site for morbid fascination, just ashes and silence. But the case of Robert Alton Harris left echoes far beyond the prison walls. To some, his death marked justice long overdue. To others, the drawn-out legal struggle and the spectacle of gas chamber death raised deep questions about the moral cost of capital punishment. California had returned to the death penalty, but at what price? And perhaps the most haunting part of all his final words, spoken just before the gas began to rise. You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper. Indeed, friends, on that cold morning in San Quentin, the Reaper danced, and Robert Alton Harris could no longer run. In the end, Robert Alton Harris's final 24 hours reflected both the horror of his past and the deep ambivalence surrounding the justice system that ultimately condemned him. From his calm demeanor to his unexpected final words, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everybody dances with the Grim Reaper." Harris seemed to embrace death with a strange mix of bravado and resignation. But behind the process, the legal delays, the public scrutiny, the return of the gas chamber were the memories of 2 young boys whose lives he stole in cold blood. For their families, no amount of legal maneuvering could erase that pain. And for the state of California, Harris's execution signaled not just a resumption of capital punishment, but a reckoning with the moral cost of it. Was it justice, or simply revenge dressed as law? That's the question we're all left to consider. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.